On behalf of the CEIPA board, I welcome you all to this virtual meeting on corruption. Thank you for your interest, and in particular, I would like to thank the 4 very interesting speakers for responding to our question. And this meeting would not have been possible without the input of our technical team, led by Dominique Faubert and Heather and others. Corruption makes a country sick. Corruption makes people insecure, anxious, and therefore it is important to dare to speak about this crime. Also to see a current state of affairs in a new light, to also offer a perspective. Everything can be better because doing nothing and not making anything visible is food for anti-politics. And I'd like to give the floor to Peter van Bettenvalvie, who will lead this event this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patsy. Yes, indeed, you said that the panelists are quite exceptional, and I would say that our distinguished panelists are fearless personalities who campaigned for years for transparency, for human rights, for the freedom of media and press, and the compliance with the rule of law. And for that, I would wish to thank you all for coming punctually to this meeting, Zoom meeting at 2 o'clock. I also once more thank for those who participate in this meeting, the attendees, and I hope the attendees will participate actively through the possibility of posing questions, ticking on the right side of the screen. I hope you have it, and you will be posing some good questions to the interesting speakers. We thought that we would turn to the first 2 speakers. That is Daniel Freund, who is a member of the European Parliament, who has a long record of working in this field. I'm not going to mention at all his merits because there are too many. He is now chairing one of the most important cross-cutting groups in the European Parliament dealing with the combating of this terrible crime. Then I would like to ask Professor Pascal Hélène Dubois from Georgetown University. Welcome, and I'm sorry that you had to wake up so early today for this meeting, and ask to comment on the international impact and international lawmaking in this field. So without speaking now too much, yes, and of course afterwards we will have a lively debate. And after this debate, I will ask Pavla Holcova and Alicia Clegg to discuss corruption in the light of the whistleblower directive and in the light of the EU measures to protect journalists and the media. So this is more or less the architecture of the meeting. May I turn to you, Daniel Freund, and may I also thank you that you took your time in spite of your busy schedule. Please, you have the floor.
Thanks so much for the invitation. A very important topic, and as you said, that I have been working on for many years, including in civil society, where I started on this topic. I have worked for Transparency International for 5 years in the EU office. And just this week, TI published their latest report, the European Corruption Barometer, where they analyzed particularly now how during the pandemic and following the pandemic things have evolved. And I think that's very, very relevant, because the European Union is just about to start dispersing the recovery fund, so the investment money to relaunch the European economy. That's of course very much needed following the economic collapse that we have seen in a number of member states following the corona crisis. But it also means if we're spending twice the money now, basically over the next couple of years, well, from my point of view, it would mean that we also need to spend twice as much, at least, on those that are checking that this money goes where it's supposed to go, that it isn't being stolen, that it doesn't end up in the pockets of corrupt people, politicians or business people, and we aren't. And I have to say that in general, the European Union has been weak to respond to this growing challenge of corruption. In the European Union, it often goes hand in hand with the decline of the rule of law, attacks on free media, on the independence of the judiciary. I have spent a lot of time in the last 2 years as a member of parliament working on the situation in Hungary. That is maybe the most severe situation that we see, and also the case where the link between what Viktor Orban calls building an illiberal democracy, but which is really a kleptocracy, because one of the main reasons for him to do all this is the enrichment of him, his direct family and friends. And so far the European Union hasn't really managed to really do anything about this problem. I'm going to go through a couple of points where we see that the fight against corruption is really not at the top of the list of the European Commission. Let me maybe start with our international obligations. There is the UN Convention Against Corruptions. This convention, the EU has been a member to since 2008, and nothing has happened. It's been 13 years and nothing has happened so far. The EU hasn't done the initial step that would be foreseen, which is the self-assessment, let alone has there been a peer review or has the EU participated in any of the review cycles that have taken place since then. And so very little, even in terms of looking at what is the legal situation, what is the situation concretely in fact when it comes to the readiness to respond to corruption challenges. The EU published an anti-corruption report in 2014, where the situation in the then 28 member states was analyzed. They didn't do the 29th chapter on the EU institutions. And more importantly, this was only one iteration of this report. Since then, we have not published any follow-up to this. And the Commission, although they say they have sort of folded this into other mechanisms, the European semester, now the rule of law report, but there is no standalone assessment of what is actually the situation of corruption or the corruption risks in each member states. There are no dedicated lists of these are the recommendations to member states, and even less so are there any mechanisms to incite or to force or to encourage member states to actually implement those recommendations. So given that that is the situation, when I was elected 2 years ago to the European Parliament, I started this intergroup. I think corruption is an issue that should not be politicized. And actually, indeed, in all those countries where it becomes a politicized issue, the fight against corruption stalls or is lost. So I think that it's incredibly important to do this cross-party and to, in a way, separated from the current political struggles where we might have different ideas on all kinds of things, but actually the fight against corruption should unite us all. And that's quite successful in the European Parliament. We have 130 members from all the let's say democratic groups, pro-European groups in the European Parliament, and we work and we coordinate on these issues. And the European Parliament has been a strong voice on these issues, on the rule of law. Most recently, well, I was one of the people that negotiated this new rule of law mechanism that now allows the European Union, well, the Commission, to cut EU funding to those member states where there is a combination of rule of law violations and a risk for the EU budget. So basically meaning there is corruption with EU funds. And I think that was a success that we actually got this new tool, but now obviously it's about using it, because it's nice to have a tool, but if you don't use it, then it helps very little. And in the Parliament just a week and a half ago now, we decided that we're taking the Commission to court. If they don't become active and if they don't use this new tool against member states, and we see that there's a number of member states that fulfill the criteria to be sanctioned right now for gross violations of the rule of law and widespread corruption, well, then we're taking them to court. And this is the next escalation step, but we have already said that we would also in time censure the European Commission. The European Parliament is dead serious about defending the rule of law in the European Union. There has been too much inaction for far too long. Before I finish with my remarks on the European Public Prosecutor, which I think is the second important tool that has just come online 17 days ago, right? And I'm just coming back. I came back this morning from Slovenia, where I looked at the situation on the ground for the past 2 days. And Slovenia is the only country that has joined the European Public Prosecutor, because not all member states, of course, are part of the prosecutor, and Poland and Hungary most notably are absent from this. But Slovenia did join, but now the Prime Minister Janša refuses to appoint or actually just forward the Slovenian candidates for delegated prosecutors, and thereby basically dismantled from the start the participation of Slovenia in this tool that they have signed up to. But I think there is a lot of hope on the public prosecutor, because for the first time we have an EU institution that can directly on the ground investigate cases of fraud and corruption. They have the same rights, the same powers as national prosecutors. So that's quite powerful and a big step forward in comparison to the system that we had before, where we basically had very little powers and everything was reliant on the national prosecution. So I have high hopes. We as Parliament on this one as well have managed to, I think, install what is probably the best candidate to lead this new prosecution, Laura Kövesi, which has made a name for herself in putting corrupt politicians behind bars in her own home country of Romania. She is reasonably fearless, I'd say, in addressing corruption, even when it reaches the highest offices. And we do have a case now of a commission audited conflict of interest of a prime minister in the European Union with the Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. She has opened an investigation in this case. So those are some good signs. I'd say that with these new tools, maybe we can give the fight against corruption in the European Union a new impetus, a new push, because it's needed, I'd say. Your microphone.
Daniel, thank you very much. I always enjoy to listen to you, because you first describe the very, very gloomy, pessimistic situation, and then you give us a bit of light at the end. So we will see now whether Pascale Hélène Dubois is going to share our views, and whether she is going to reflect any of those thoughts broached by Daniel in the international context, on the level of OECD or UNCAC or even UNODC. You have a very broad view on those legal instruments and the political implications of them. So please, the floor is yours. You have to unmute, right?
I just did that. Okay, so thanks very much. Thanks for having me, and was really interested in hearing from you, Daniel. And the first thing I would say is I couldn't agree more that the fight against corruption should not be politicized. At the end of the day, what is it that we're talking about? We're talking about taxpayers' money that needs to be used properly. And so I've always liked to look at corruption and anti-corruption in terms of what the Americans view it more as, an anti-waste, anti-fraud. At the end of the day, governments are supposed to use the taxpayers' money to provide certain services. How many of those services are actually being provided? And so the proof's in the pudding, the proof's in the the end services, goods and services which are provided to the citizens. Now, to take a step back, one may wonder where this all came from. So when I went to law school in Belgium. I graduated in 86. In those days, one did not learn at all about corruption, international anti-corruption. Also, when I did a master's in the US, same thing. I mean, this was just not on the horizon. And then when I joined the World Bank, things started. That was in 97 rather. Things started to change. So where did it all come from? So first of all, there is a difference between national anti-corruption and international anti-corruption. As far as national anti-corruption is concerned, there has always been in every country a law which prohibits the payment of a bribe to a local government official. Now, as we all know, these laws are often not implemented, but there are laws on the books. And one of the first laws ever was Codex Hammurabi. I'm going to read from this. If a builder builds a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built falls in and kills its owner, then the builder shall be put to death. So these days, the punishment is more agreeable, but the point is that even in the oldest written law, there is already mention of fraud and corruption and the fact that the laws prohibit it. Now, when one talks about international anti-corruption, meaning foreign bribery and the prohibition thereof, one talks about the payment of a bribe to a foreign government official. So not the payment of a bribe by a Belgian company to a Belgian government official, but the payment of a bribe by a Belgian company to, say, a government official in an African country. That is a very new concept. And the first country to start doing something about it was the US in the 70s with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which emanated out of the Watergate scandal. And during the Watergate scandal, it appeared during the hearings that a lot of US multinationals had been paying bribes. Notably, an American defense company had paid bribes to Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. And so the atmosphere in the US in the time of the Watergate was one of outrage, right? The population was very annoyed with what had happened, was shocked, was deeply shocked. And in that same movement, the international anti-corruption movement started because it was considered as not a good thing for American multinationals to go pay bribes abroad. Politically, I was told that it was viewed as something that could be viewed as anti-capitalistic. It was just not a good for reputation. And so, interestingly enough, the US in 77 put a law on the books where it prohibits American companies or companies with a link to America to pay a bribe, not only to American government officials, but government officials abroad. Needless to say, the moment that the US has the law like this on the books, it started thinking, well, maybe, the companies were saying, US companies were saying, well, this is not very competitive, because if we can't pay bribes, what about the French, the Belgians, etc. So lo and behold, several years later, under the push from the US, the OECD, which at that time was encompassing all the big trading partners of the US. And so the OECD pushes through a convention, the OECD Convention Against Bribery. And then at that point, all the trading partners, all the big trading partners at that time are now covered by a law that said that they could no longer pay bribes abroad. Once the rich trading partners were covered, it didn't take too long then for the UN to come out with a convention which covered the rest of the world. And so by now, at least from an international convention point of view, one can say that every country, pretty much every country in the law has signed on to this UN Convention Against Corruption, which again, the main point is the prohibition of a bribe to a foreign government official. Now, against that backdrop as well, the international organizations such as the World Bank and the other international organizations jumped on the bandwagon as well. And so the multilateral development banks, since I would say about 97, 98, have a rule whereby, or have a system rather, what they call a sanction system, but it's really a debarment system. If a contractor pays a bribe on a contract which is financed by the World Bank or the other multilateral development banks, or it could also be fraud, collusion, corruption, or coercion. If that happens on a contract financed by one of the multilateral development banks, then those multilateral development banks have the right to investigate and to debar a company. In Europe, it's called exclusion. So we now see that there is, by and large, at least a legal system which covers all the countries in the world. But as you might have understood already, obviously, the implementation is very different depending on where one is talking. And I want to mention a couple of challenges. So we're now 43 years after the start of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which started this, international anti-corruption movement. And what we see as challenges is that there is not always a level playing field. For the first time, I think it was last year, the European countries combined, and plus some others, were actually having as much enforcement or just a little bit more enforcement than the US. But until now, it was really only the US through the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that was having meaningful enforcement. And it's only in the past several years that you started with, the UK, and then actually Germany was first, and then the UK, and then France, and But for instance, in my home country, Belgium, still waiting for actual implementation of these foreign bribery conventions. And Greco, which is the group of states against corruption, recently came out with another report saying that the Belgians, were not implementing this. So. And one sees this, and not just, I don't want to pick only on Belgium, but one sees this in, many other countries. So these principles are not being implemented with the same level of enthusiasm. There remains also a big asymmetry between active corruption, meaning the companies that pay the bribes, and passive corruption, the government officials that receive the bribes. So there is very little being done against this passive corruption, against the government officials receiving the bribes. If you want to tackle corruption, you obviously need to work on both sides. And then one thing which I've seen, and I'll stop after that, there is a big tension, and I'm talking now about the COVID situation. There's always a big tension between a desire to push out as much money as possible whenever there is a humanitarian problem or a health problem such as COVID, and the need to protect public funds. And unfortunately, the more urgent the situation is, the more corruption, a certain level of fraud and corruption will be accepted. And some people call this a noble purpose corruption, as in, things are urgent, move out of the way with your, anti-corruption stuff, we don't want to hear about it, we need to save lives. In the end, though, we are in 2021. We know what to do against corruption, so it's a bit disappointing to me. I'll finish on a more negative note than Daniel did. So I find it rather disappointing, actually, that we're in 2021, that we know better, and that with all this COVID money, I have not seen a really big interest on the part of the politicians and the governments to actually make sure that the money arrives where it should, and there's never been a better time to ensure that the money arrives where it should. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Pascale, for this interesting views, I'm now asking the panelists, would you mind, or would you wish to ask a few questions, or maybe Daniel, would you like to reflect upon what Pascale has said?
Well, I mean, the historic evolution on this is quite remarkable, right? That's something that was so widespread, tax deductible corruption just a few years ago, and where we are now that's good, but I think there's a long way still to go. And kind of the situation we now see in the European Union is that we have some governments questioning whether there is a similar standard of the rule of law, for example, where Hungary, and as I said, just in Slovenia, I hear the same tones now saying, well, there's different cultures, you know, and that really does not exist. There's no such thing as a culture of corruption, and even less so is there a culture of corruption that's worth protecting. And I think, again, that is something, you know, that we have to stand united on, and not allow people to make such arguments, because, well, otherwise the fight against corruption is very difficult. And the other point that I still want to make on this is how important it is for the anti-corruption community to keep hope. Because that moment when people, when citizens in general have the impression, oh, everyone is just corrupt in my country or in my country's politics, then you lose. Then the fight is truly lost. But as long as there is, you know, civil society, as long as there are citizens fighting for this, as long as there's a few investigative journalists left, there is always hope. That you know, you get the crooks at the end, and that's part of our job as well, to keep that flame alive wherever it's most needed, because you know, that's the biggest ally of corrupt politicians is the indifference, or the, you know, when people really lose the fighting spirit, because then they can really do whatever they want, and that's dangerous.
Would any of the distinguished panelists, Pabla or Alicia, pose a question, or just insert an intervention, short one, to what Pascale and what Daniel has said? Well, then I leave you in peace. I've just tried to be polite, of course, because I thought that you may want to enter. What you both said is actually, in a way, very discouraging, because we have, of course, the corruption, which, as Pascale, you said, more or less is considered as a gentleman's delict. You know, the national companies, we all know it, have to bribe governments to get some contracts or some counterparts, and this is being done. And very often this is being justified as an act in promoting national interest, promoting economy, promoting the jobs and employment. So this is the one part. The other part, and I would like to hear from both of you the reaction. The other part of your intervention is, are we really believing in this myth that a multilateral or a regional organization or a political body can prosecute and sanction national governments, or in your case, Pascale, multinational private companies? I'm asking you both. Are we on the right track? And as you said, Daniel, yes, okay, we will, and I'm very happy about this, that the parliament is flexing its muscles and is taking the commission to the full responsibility. But what will be the next steps afterwards? We have a public prosecutor, as you said, partly supported by the member states, partly not supported. Will that be enough in order to bring some order and some justice and some transparency to this very, very, very complex, politically unpleasant issue? Daniel, would you like to?
I mean, I don't think that there is this one next step. I think the fight against corruption happens through a numbers of tools, and it is actually important to use all the tools that we have. I mean, that's partly why we're suing the Commission, because there are tools that they're currently not using. On the rule of law mechanism itself, I mean, I really hope that the ever increasing pressure on the Commission is ultimately going to mean that they are going to launch procedures. The commissioner that's in charge of this right now says, well, they will start something in the autumn. I'm impatiently waiting for them to get going. But I think that once they actually do start using this is a powerful weapon, because in many of the countries where the corruption situation is most severe, EU funds play a very decisive role. In Hungary, 95% of public investment has EU money in it. So if the EU money is gone, that will severely limit the capacity of the government to invest, and citizens would notice reasonably quickly. And so I think this is really a tool that can do a lot. On the European Public Prosecutor, well, I'm hopeful that now that she is operational, that we're going to start seeing the first cases coming out in due time, and that hopefully as well changes things and sends a message to all of those intending to or currently stealing EU funds, that there is a new player in town that hopefully will send some fear in their direction, so that they stop what they're doing. Of course, there's formidable challenges there as well. The member states have refused to fund the prosecutor the way that she needs to be funded, given the current workload that's on the table. Member states have time and again, not only Slovenia, as I said, but a number of member states have interfered with the appointment, the selection procedures, dedicating full-time or part-time prosecutors to the European Public Prosecutor and so on. And one has to say that the mandate of the European Public Prosecutor is reasonably limited. This is only about EU funds. It's not about cross-border crime. It is not about general widespread corruption in a country. It's not about fighting the mafia or drug trafficking across the union or anything like that. But I would say, if I have to pick in this difficult environment where member states basically don't want to give their sovereignty and their judicial powers to a European structure, let's see what she can do in the field that she now is responsible for, and then in sort of over the mid or longer term, let's reflect how we can extend the competences. Because if I look, Pascal knows the situation in the US much better than I do, but just a first-hand comparison of the kind of capabilities that the US Department of Justice, the FBI have in fighting cross-state corruption in the United States, so to speak, and the kind of capacities we have with Olaf and now the European public prosecutors. It's a very different ballpark, I'd say, and there's much more still to do on the European side in terms of capacity building.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. So I don't want to enter immediately with some other questions. It's always, of course, it's a symptomatic matter for the Union to create always a new institution. We also lobbied for the creation of this prosecutor, but on the other hand, and you said it in many of your speeches and the writing, we have the Eurojust, we have the Europol, we have at least 8 or 9, I even forget now to count because I always repeated, security bodies in the EU. We can create another one. I'm not pessimistic, and don't misunderstand me, but this is the reflex when the European institutions do not see the way how to force governments, member states to do certain acts. And here I'm asking also to you by posing the question, Pascal, how about the international arbitration? You started to speak about this. So is today, I'm trying to provoke you a little, is today the international arbitration just the muscle of Washington, of the US? And if the US would disappear, would Europe be absolutely helpless in this situation?
Are you talking arbitration or sanctioning in general?
Arbitration and sanctioning, because sorry, I should be clear. I'm heading for sanctioning. Yes.
Okay.
To make it simple.
Thank you. So I want to pick up on a few things that were being said here. First of all, to your point, Peter, that whenever there's an issue, the reaction tends to be to set up another organization or come up with another bunch of rules. So I told you I recently retired, but now it's about a year and a half, and so I in addition to the teaching, or because maybe the teaching that I do, I have to really follow on a day-to-day basis what is happening. And so in the area of anti-corruption, one thing which I've noticed is that there is just this field has just exploded, right? I'm part of several advocacy groups and the like, and everywhere I look, I see new organizations, both at the civil society level. I see new things being promoted at the level of the governments or internationally speaking. There's a plethora of rules, as I told you. There's all these conventions. So among several people involved with anti-corruption, there is now more of a push and a desire to say, okay, enough with new rules, new tools. Let's look at what we have already on the books and let's start implementing it. Because quite often this knee-jerk reaction to come up with yet another convention, yet another international institution, that is often, I think, politically an expedient thing for the politicians to say, well, look, here we're doing something, right? We have a new institution, we have a new law. But at the end of the day, what matters is, are we implementing? Are we actually using everything that is on the books? And as we know, that is not always the case. And so I think I read a book not too long ago about a professor called Michael Johnston. And so he is decrying the fact that there is now a cottage industry, an anti-corruption cottage industry. A lot of people, are making money out of, advising corporations and the like. And so against all of that, I think for us, it's important to go back to the drawing board to say, okay, what is on the books right now and what can we implement? Having said that, though, one needs to always look at what is needed in a particular environment. And I totally agree that EPPO, the European Prosecutor's Office, that was something that was necessary. I wish them a lot of luck, because they're going to be needing a lot of luck, because whenever you set up a new organization like that one, and you mentioned all these other European institutions that exist, having been on the side of setting up offices from scratch myself, what happens in the beginning years, and this is why I think we're all going to have to be very patient with the first results emanating from EPPO. First of all, cases take a very long time to develop. And if the experience of EPPO is going to be like the ones that I'm familiar with, there are going to be a lot of turf battles initially in the first several years, because often what happens is that institutions are being set up, but the mandate is not entirely clear. A lot of things are where you should have, in fact, detailed implementation rules. Those detailed implementation rules are not there. And so I can just imagine that the guys from EPPO come in a particular country and all they're going to find is roadblocks, and sometimes very subtle, right? Add to that the fact that there isn't enough budget, that, like I said, the mandate may not be totally clear, and that not all the countries have signed up. This is going to be, a very tough order. And I think also from civil society and from the everybody, who's on the anti-corruption side, being patient with EPPO in terms of when they come out with results, I think that is going to be important. One last thing that I want to say is a plug for civil society and also especially for investigative journalists. Without investigative journalists, quite frankly, often nothing would happen, right? It's the investigative journalists and the consortia, that we've seen, of which, Pavla is a member, that have exposed a lot of things. And once things are exposed, it's irrefutable evidence that there is a giant problem occurring. And that then pushes the political side and the others to actually do something with those rules, right? And with those organizations that are already there. So because of that, I am more optimistic that something is going to happen. And one last thing, a reason for optimism. I want to bring it back to the environment in the US around the Watergate. When something happens that is so bad and so that really affects so many people, that's when the populations are pushed into doing something new. And I think with COVID, this is what is going to happen. With COVID, so many people were lost family members. I mean, there's nobody who doesn't know somebody who died, or a friend of a friend who died. I mean, it's affected everybody. At the same time, economically speaking, everybody is in a worse situation, right? Because all the countries have indebted themselves. This is something we're going to have to live with for a very long time.
Yes.
Against that backdrop, I really do think that the populations will become more interested in making sure that the money is being used properly. And so I think it's, the pendulum swims back and forth, but I'm very optimistic because you can just feel it, that there's going to be a groundswell again of people who are going to say enough, make sure that money is being spent.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to share your optimism. We still have about 10 minutes for the discussion also with Daniel. There are some questions from the participants, actually quite a number. I would like just to mention a few keywords, linking money laundering with corruption. Then the Commission should improve its way to follow the use of money, which Daniel, you always advocate. And then the risks. There is a question, do you consider the RRF appropriate for corruption, fraud, risk protection and controls? Does it buzz any ring? Daniel, would you like to respond to that? And then Pascal, please.
Yeah, I mean, this question of the recovery fund, I mean, so as I said, we are going to spend more than double the amount per year over the next couple of years. So if there is a lot of money distributed fast, this increases corruption risks, right? Particularly if you don't increase similarly the capacity of anti-corruption bodies. That's just, basic logic. And obviously we have an economic interest for money to go out, for money to be invested to relaunch the economy. And so there's always a balance to strike, of how much checks can you do, how much bureaucracy, because that's then what it is about, how strictly do you check on a specific project, on a specific applicant. So it's a tough choice in a way. Are you going to accept that there is going to be misspending and some fraud because you want to relaunch the economy? But I think what we then need to do is to work on the institutions in the meantime, and not to eternally postpone that we have functioning anti-corruption bodies, a good way of checking up once the money is spent, and that from the outset we send clear political messages that if we discover fraud, we are going to prosecute that, and we're going to try our very best to recoup that money that is being stolen. But ultimately, there is going to be fraud, there is going to be misuse, there is going to be bad projects. That's just how it goes. But you then have to empower the institutions to clean that up. What's additionally worrying with the RRF, of course, and the legal base that was used, is that this is not treated the way that normal EU budget is treated. You don't have the full check, for example, by the European Parliament. We actually have no role in controlling what this money is being spent on. because this is the governments of the member states deciding this alone. I think this was a wrong choice, but ultimately our demands on this from the Parliament side were not listened to. We can do some checks afterwards once the money is being spent, but then, as we say in German, the kid has fallen into the well. You know, I would have preferred that we get a say as well, which is the normal role of a parliament on the budget and which projects this money goes to. Let me say one word still on the, you know, what is alluded with money laundering, and also the question of where this money goes. For now, the Commission actually has reasonably little idea of where EU money goes. We have asked as Parliament for the Commission to tell us, so who are the biggest recipients of EU funding in each country? And they cannot tell us. They send us useless lists of national paying agents, but they don't know who are, you know, even if there's a long structure of ownership, of this company owns another company owned by some shareholder group, whatever. But we cannot see who are the ultimate beneficial owners that are receiving this EU funds. And if we don't know who gets the money, well, we don't know how many conflicts of interest there are, how much of this money actually goes to Viktor Orban, his family, or the Czech Prime Minister and his large Agrofert corporation. Because we simply don't know where the money is going. So there is quite a bit still to do in terms of making that transparent, in terms of using IT tools as well to prevent fraud and corruption against the EU budget. But there is on this one as well still a lot of reticence by member states to do this. And sometimes I understand, right? Each of the member states have their own system. Actually, in a country like my own, in Germany, a federal country, there is at least 16 different systems for each state, its own system. And then they are reluctant to say, now we change all this and we do an EU software to manage the program spending and the budget allocations. But if we don't have that, if we don't have one system that connects this in all member states, well, then we are not seeing if the corporation of the Czech Prime Minister, Agrofert, which has subsidiaries in 6 or 7 EU countries, you know, we don't manage to link that the German subsidiary is getting money here, that the Polish subsidiary is getting money there, and that there might be, you know, issues with cross-border funding, and you know, all this we just cannot see when, you know, from a theoretical point of view, it would be so easy if you have one software, all the projects go into one database, and then you can flag them for certain corruption risks, right? Which tenders have been allocated in a process where there was only one bidder, or, you know, certain companies that have in the past been caught in corruption cases. Can I now check, you know, when they win new tenders again? Those kind of things we just currently cannot do. Because of the cacophony of different systems in the member state and the lack of working databases, for example.
Daniel, thank you very much. I'm being just signalized that Pavla may have some technical problems, which make her not available for the overall meeting. So I would like to pose just maybe one question to you, Pavla, since the Czech Prime Minister is always mentioned in such a prominent position, conflict of interest and fraud and misuse of public funds. Would you like to enter now the debate, while I'm asking Pascale to hold back your comment on the international side of the prosecution and control of money flows? Pavla, please.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, yes, Andrej Babiš, I feel deeply ashamed of him. And by the way, we created a database when we actually collect all the subsidies in all countries worldwide. He has something like around 1,000 companies, and he's getting plenty of.
We don't hear you too well.
Fortunately, much more. And we also included the rounds of meeting. But this, you know, this
The sound is not good.
it's quite frustrating. It is, EU is
Pavla,
having good
we are
ideas in,
Pavla, we are losing.
fighting corruption, but
Pavla, we are
yes,
losing you a little. There is a technical
I
problem.
can hear you well.
We cannot hear you too well. But please go on.
Okay, just let me know. It's a frustrating debate for me because I'm representing investigative journalists, and journalism is considered one of the most powerful, most effective tool to fight corruption, not only the local or the regional one, but also the cross-border. But at the same time, we don't have much support from EU to do our job. And you know that there is a grant program that is focused on the projects that, you know, are supporting investigative journalists, but the budget for this project, actually the money you can get as a grant is around 1 million euros, but for the whole EU. So it's really, the grants are funny. It's like 7,000 euros. It's like 10,000 euros, but it's not more. And, you know, if there's a lot of pressure, and we take as a journalist a lot of hit by fighting or exposing corruption, but we don't have enough support from EU, and that's kind of a sad, you know. We are the ones who take the hits. We are the ones who are getting prosecuted. We are the ones who are called enemy of people. We are the ones who are getting killed. But at the same time, you know, our budgets are shrinking. We can't really do enough of the work that would be needed. We can't hire more people to train them and to ask them to expose corruption with us because we don't have the money. And we are now, you know, facing the fact that more and more people who are getting EU subsidies are buying media. So we are actually, you know, also fighting the fact that the public opinion is owned by the bigger media, and we as a small, you know, independent centers who are doing investigative journalism, we are just, you know, we need to spend a lot of time and effort and money on fundraising. We don't have, you know, the support that we need to expose the corruption and to explain to people why this is needed, why the Czech Prime Minister is really capturing the state, because he owns through the media public opinion. He owns, you know, the EU subsidies, and he's not going to give it back, because the people who should rule, who should decide if the law was, you know, if he should give back the subsidies, they are his employees, they are his party members, and it's just, you know, frustrating. And even if we still have the law enforcement that is partly independent, there is not really a way how to handle it. You know, the prosecutors are saying this is wrong as it is happening. It is wrong, the state capture is happening, but they can't really enforce something that they don't have the power of, like to enforce the Ministry of Finances to stop giving Andrej Babiš the money for EU subsidies, even if they call it fraud. That's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Well, that's a tough reality. Is Daniel Freund still with us, or he left this moment? He left. Well, Pascal, would you like to react to this point? I mean, you said also the journalists basically can save us. Journalists like Pavla and Alicia, who are writing about those things. Is that the ultimate solution we have if the institutions and the law does not work on some of those issues?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of things have to work for things to work, right? Meaning you cannot rely on just civil society or the whistleblowers, individuals, or investigative journalists. I mean, if we get to the point where those are the only things, you know, propping up the system, then I think we should be quite worried about where the situation has gone to. And I find that and this is from what I've seen all over the world, to the extent that systems are going after investigative journalists, that is a very bad sign. And in terms of the overall what is happening in a particular society, and it's a talking about individual whistleblowers is one of the most difficult things that somebody can do, to be an individual whistleblower. Journalists are trained to do their particular jobs. They're trained to withstand a lot of pressure, but that doesn't mean that they should be prosecuted and encounter physical harm, which is what is happening in a lot of countries. So I think it's too easy to say, oh, at the end of the day, let's just rely on whistleblowers and on investigative journalists. Everything should be done to help those whistleblowers, and I know we'll talk more about this, but to create an environment where investigative journalism continues to be supported. And then I'd be interested in hearing from Pavla, support in practice. What does that mean? Does it mean not prosecuting you when you shouldn't be prosecuting? I mean, let's not even talk about not harassing and physical harm. In practice, what does it mean? Because if it means providing money to you, then so that you can hire enough people, etc., money may come with ties as well. So how do you view getting your funds from? Because if you're in this hypothetical question, but if you happen to be in a country that is has some issues in terms of anti-corruption, and that government itself pays you massive amounts of money, then that might come with ties. So two questions: what exactly does it mean, support? And secondly, how do you view where the money is coming from to help the journalists?
Of course, we can't take the money from the government. Definitely, that's why we need some grant provider, and we understand it comes with the ties, it comes with audits, it comes with reports on how we spend the money and on transparent accountancy, and we are okay with it because we are already doing it. Just from EU, it's coming such a small amounts to such a few that it can't really face the pandemic corruption, and we are really depending on those money. There are media that decided that they will be okay with the money from the government, but usually those are media who are not doing investigative journalism, or at least not proper investigative journalism. And of course, this is just one part of the problem. We need better support. After our colleague Jan Kuciak was murdered with his fiancée Martina Kushnirova 2.5 years ago, the EU expressed its concern. It made a committee to help to investigate, but EU doesn't have the force to actually do anything, to enforce their decisions if something is going wrong, and EU doesn't even have the power to actually bring those issues to the public to understand that quite often it's a failure of the government and it's part of the state capture of or corruption. So the help they are providing is quite academic, and we are happy for it, at least something. But still, we would need much more. Well, we would probably need to explain to general public why EU is needed and why EU is not bad. What is the general narrative in our countries like Czech Republic, Poland, or Hungary? As you can probably understand, there are reasons for it. But still, the support of EU, who wants us to do the job of fighting corruption, to be the guardians of the EU funds, and to be exposing the corruption, and to be kind of a PR agencies of EU without actually giving us any support. It's just funny, it's just puts all the heat and all the pressure on us without EU being able to take the proper steps. You know, expressing concern on diplomatic level could sound good, you know, but it's not enough.
Paula, thank you for these very clear words. There are a few questions from the attendees. For example, I interpreted one question is here. The question of the security, would that be improvement of security of investigative journalists from your point of view if the European Public Prosecutor's Office would establish direct links to investigative journalists like you and would help you with the investigation, or you would, of course, you would help the Office of the Public Prosecutor also in some way. Would that be a possibility for you? Would you see it as a reinforcement of your security in the situation?
I don't see how this could be happening. First thing, you know, the prosecutors are usually that are being part of the EU prosecution. They are quite often appointed by local governments, what means they were somehow vetted and approved by local governments. So quite often we won't be able to work with them because we simply don't trust them. And if we are talking about security, I am not really sure how something that we must take into account why we are working as the prevention of possible harm could be happening ex post with the help of prosecution, because what prosecution is doing is they are prosecuting and quite often investigating. But first, then there need to be the crime to start the prosecution. And, you know, if we would come as a journalist to prosecution saying, hey, I feel I'm being followed, then what they would do, you know, they can't really do much. They can't really send prosecutors to take counter surveillance measures just to check if we are indeed prosecuted or not. They could say, aha, we will take the note, and if someone will really harm you, then we will express concern and we can start the prosecution. But that's probably it, you know. If we are talking about security of journalists in the field that I work in, we are talking about minutes and hours. We are not talking about weeks and months.
As regarding the prosecution and prevention, I'm sure, Pascal, you may want to say something, but before that, because Pavla, you were so clear on and appealing to the question of the funding. We had the case for the past many years that Mr. Soros has been funding certain activities. And you have seen it, what happened with his university, what happened with his image in some of the countries due to the very pointed and very well designed government campaigns against him. This is the first reaction from my side. And the second one is your compatriot, Mrs. Jourova, who is one of the vice presidents of the Commission, has enacted this program you are probably referring to. And the question is, what is being now expected, in spite of the fact that we all know what you are into, but you have to lead the political opinion in a way, because many of the parliamentarians, not like Daniel, who knows the situation, but many of the parliamentarians are also coming from the other side of the society, and they don't understand what they have to do. And sometimes you have to tell them in a clear words, we need that and that funding for this and these activities. And I think this such an event would be quite good, even to incite our colleagues in the European Parliament to have a few meetings with you and to push the Commission for certain programs which are less bureaucratic and which are providing money. I fully agree that this is, at the moment, it's an impossible situation. You know it all. I think that for every penny you get from the Commission, you have to write 15,000 reports and then to justify yourself. So this is really not the situation for you, probably. But nevertheless, would you see a good point on this beginning of this new initiative by Mrs. Jourova?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I already have been attending a couple of such meetings within European Parliament to explain what we as investigative journalists are doing. But probably it was not enough. So I am slightly skeptical. But of course, if there will be any such an event, I would be happy to take part and come and explain what is needed and what could be expected from our side.
Yeah, it sounds sad, but probably this is the reality. Pascal, what would you say from your point of view?
I was going to say a lot of sympathy for Pavla and the other journalists, because expressing diplomatic sympathy, right? I mean, this is something that in my own job, I would hear all over. I mean, to get sympathy from people and to say like, oh, well done, and this is. It's very good that you guys are doing this, but at the end of the day, what does that really mean? And if investigative journalism does not have enough funds available, well then they're not going to be able to hire the people that are going to do the job. So it needs to go further than just expressing sympathy. Also, to do something ex post facto, well, it's too late. I mean, the harm has been done. The journalist has been killed, or has been hurt physically. So I think the time has come to go well past, at the EU level, but also at the level of international organizations, such as UN and the others, to go well past the oh, you're doing so well, and we're glad you're there, and to go actually into proper action. Action does require funds, right? And you also mentioned earlier, Peter, there's inequality of arms where you have the wrongdoers being represented extremely well, and then the whistleblowers or the journalists or whomever on the other side having very few means. You need to have the proper means, and you also need to have, and I'm talking now about on the enforcement side, not only the proper budget, and of course one needs to account for the budget. I mean, when I was running an investigative unit, I got along very well with the budget people and with the accounting people, because I think that amongst all the people in the world, it's people in charge of governance that need to be able to explain how they used every single penny, and that could be done, in a non-bureaucratic way. If you're not trying to hide anything, if you're doing things properly, it's very easy to account for the money. I also want to mention something about the caliber of the professionals. It's not always easy, especially in countries that are new to this game, to find professionals that have the required caliber. And so that is, my way of making a plug for continued training of a cadre of professionals in all these countries that can deal with the enforcement of this particular type of crime, which is very different than other crimes that are there. And it's more difficult to prove. And again, there's this inequality of arms. So to the extent that the bad guys, for lack of a better word, are represented by the finest and the brightest, on the enforcement side, one also needs people of a very high caliber to withstand this power on the other side.
Yes, thank you. There is a question from the attendees by Jean-Guy Giraud. He would like to speak and he would like to make a short intervention. I would like to invite him to make his short intervention to the panelists, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my question really was addressed to Mr. Freund, who has now left, but I can phrase it in a more general way. Ex post, ex ante control. Obviously, ex ante is better than ex post. What does ex ante means? Ex ante means, by example, in the EU, that the Commission, the General Directorate, should be able to trace the EU money step by step in the member states, so that at every point, every different point of expenditure in the member states, the Commission should be informed how much, by whom, how. This is possible in legal terms. This is difficult in practical terms, but not impossible. With global data, now this can be done. The only thing would be for the Commission to invite member states to have the same sort of data equipment. Full stop.
Thank you very much. This sounds very simple, but in fact, it's very complicated if you know the European institutions. The question is here, I think, on the political level, and I think that the panelists could respond to that. Daniel said, okay, in a moment, we know that one country or the other country gets up to 90% of its income, national income, from the European Union. So we will punish this country, stop the payment, and then press these people, the bad guys, to the knees. Well, I mean, I would like to invite you to comment to this, because there are very different opinions on that. This can be done in a very ideal world, but who is going to suffer at the end? We have seen it in thousands of examples that not those bad guys have suffered of such measures, but the good guys, the majority. So would you like to comment on this, please?
Are you addressing me?
No, I address Pavla and Helen, and
Okay.
And Pascal and Helen.
Thank you. It looks like Pavla said that her phone line was off. Can you still speak? Maybe you want to speak first before the line goes.
I have like 2% of the battery, so if it would cut me,
Okay.
please don't take it personally. Yes, I agree that it will be good to take close look and to follow like each step of the EU fund spending in each of the countries. The problem is those who should do it are the governments itself. So if the Prime Minister is having business heavily depending on EU subsidies and he's appointing the people who should control him, it's never going to happen. So and I don't actually see the way how EU can create another institution that would do it, that would have the power and the manpower to actually follow the spending in each country step by step. But maybe that's the thing that's needed.
Thank you, Pascale.
So on this one, I would say, enough of the rubbish, right? Because if society can send men to the moon, men and women to the moon, we surely can follow the money. Come on, right? So in my experience, it is 100% a question of political will, right?
Yes.
The EU of all institutions, I mean, they're the masters of creating standards. Surely the EU can create standards for making sure that all the computer systems speak with each other. I mean, the technology is there. I wouldn't have said this 5 years ago. I wouldn't have said this definitely not 10 years ago. But in 2021, the technology is there. Blockchain exists. It does exist already with supply chains. It does exist in the private sector. It can absolutely exist at the level of the EU. I mean, if we don't even know where the money is going to, please, right? So that is, I think this is nonsense. I think it can be done. I think it's enough excuses. And I think the time has come for the EU and other international organizations to ensure that they know where the money is going to. And that is why at this point I am optimistic, because you actually have, technologically speaking, systems that can be put in place to follow the money.
Thank you, Pascal. Yes, it's true, but the problem is, for the moment, if you take this immense amounts which are mentioned on fraudulent use of money, of taxpayers' money, then you really have to ask what happened during the past 10 years. You have to work on it. You have to find the causes for that. So this is the one thing. The other thing is what is happening now, and this is probably where you take also your optimism from that. that now the parliament has stepped in with a few newly elected young parliamentarians, and they are trying to flex their muscles and look at this issue. And as just one example, the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policies. So now they are pressurizing the Commission. What it means is that that the decision, the financial decision, the dispersal of the funds, the formal dispersal, according to the new rules and regulations, is not going to take place till 2023. And those governments who like to use these funds for in an improper way, they say very simply, well, until 1923 we use the old regime. So the old regime is basically, to make it simple, is the one which makes the government responsible for use, control, and accountants and accountability of this money. So there is absolutely no way the Commission can enter this debate. So this is a type of tragedy in a way. And on the other hand, now, if I look at Pavla and the work of Alicia, of the journalists, well, what can they do? They can just discover new cases and hope that the national prosecutors or the national police, the national judicial police, and the authorities will act. But it's a very sort of very delicate and very weak hope, because as Pavla says, the European institutions or the supranational institutions can do very little. And this is why I have posed to you the question, Pascal, that what would be the international the reach of the international bodies to sanction such governments or such institutions? Do we have any good examples on that?
Yeah, so the when you're looking at the multilateral development banks, they don't sanction governments, they sanction companies, right? And so they can put pressure on governments, but governments at the end of the day are national, have sovereignty, and so you can only go so far. The international organizations, I'm talking also about the UN system, there is often a reluctance to actually push the member countries too much, because they don't want to, it's just not done. At the end of the day, there is a tendency to try and work it out. So at the end of the day, things need to happen at the national level, right? Because an international organization cannot force a country to do a particular thing. What can happen is to create the environment where it's easier for things to happen at the national level. And so, for instance, to go back to the European prosecutors, that is a good idea, because this is a very practical system whereby in each country, prosecutions will be able to happen by people that are specialized in this area and prosecute missing EU funds. I think that is a practical example of actually what to do in the international arena. International organizations such as the World Bank have a debarment system, and that obviously has had a good deterrent effect. If you have a number of companies that are excluded from further public procurement, that is something that is being heard loud and clear. But it's only one element amongst many other things that need to be done.
Thank you very much. So money plays finally a very important role. And I would wish to now to pose the question to Alicia Clegg, who is with us, who has written a great number of articles on the national laws and the application of national laws protecting journalists, but in particular protecting whistleblowers. Do we have actually a justice system from your point of view, which is giving the full rights, protection, and compensation to the whistleblowers, especially those who are dealing with fraud or reporting on fraud, injustice, and also the particular crime we are talking now? So would you like to comment on that, Alicia, please?
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I do operate in a very different territory to the one that you've been discussing. The area that I've looked at is really whistleblowing in the workplace within companies. And in the UK, we have the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which I think 20 years ago, when it came into play, was looked at as groundbreaking. But over time, I think really what's happened is that it's revealed its weaknesses in implementation, which is something that Pascal has really highlighted. I think the very disappointing thing is that whistleblowers in the UK don't have that protection. They have it on paper, but when they try to enforce that in the courts, there are all types of barriers, and possibly the biggest one is the one that we alluded to earlier, which is that you go before an employment tribunal as a whistleblower who's been victimized for raising an awkward issue. As an individual, without any support from the state, without any legal access to legal aid, if you've worked for a big company, you could be going up against top barristers and Queen's Counsel and city lawyers, and actually making your case, representing yourself as a lone individual. And I think that that is really something of a scandal in the UK system, that there is such an unequal level playing field. And although I think employment tribunals, which are the mechanism for trying to rectify the wrongs that have been done to whistleblowers, try to be accommodating, there's really very little that you can do if you have no legal training to represent yourself well. And I think the University of Greenwich has done some really interesting work on that, where they've looked at the rate of success for whistleblowers. And the ones that have legal representation are the more successful, and yet over half of whistleblowers go up alone in the courts. So I think it is a very flawed system in that respect, although it promised much when it was passed, and is very well intentioned.
Well, would you say, Alicia, that in the UK, like almost everywhere, this is also a question of money to pay good lawyers, basically?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is absolutely the case. I mean, there are some colossal sums that have been spent, for example, by the National Health Service on fighting cases. And a comment that a lawyer made to me not very long ago was that he actually felt that public authorities, taxpayer-funded authorities, are more aggressive in their pursuit of whistleblowers than corporations, because the corporations ultimately have to sort of answer to their shareholders. But if you're a large public body, then there really is no constraint on the amount of money that can be spent. And if you look at what happens in these types of cases, they can drag on for 5 or 10 years and also the public bodies themselves, or the corporations, if there is a loophole in the law, they will exploit it. And there was a sort of a very interesting case where there's a doctor, Chris Day, who's never managed to actually get his case fully heard, but he actually had to fight a legal battle to establish the right for him to sue Health Education England, who claimed that because he was in training, they weren't technically an employer. And this went on for a number of years through the courts. And we've had similar examples in the justice system, with judges being told that they can't blow the whistle because they're not employees. So you get into this sort of battle of technicalities.
Pascal, you are an expert on corruption. It's unfair now to you that we are abusing you, but since your rich experience with the international organizations, the World Bank and others, such cases like Alicia said, how do you see the mechanism of protection of whistleblowers? What sort of arbitrations are there within those organizations? Are you satisfied with the progress? In a way, I mean, you worked partially in this field. How would you comment on this, please?
So I think things have improved in the sense that if you're looking at it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, are we where we should be right now? Absolutely not, because the incentive structure for whistleblowers is not robust enough. Let me backtrack a little bit first. Unless you actually have people coming forward and expose what is going on, you're not going to find out. Corruption, fraud are the types of crimes that are done under the table. I mean, they're done, away from the eyes of others. And so unless you actually have some people who are brave enough to come forward and expose it, you would never find out. So for states, for organizations, I'm talking private sector and public sector, these organizations, these states have a benefit, have an interest in making sure that when people see something, that they say something and that they expose it. So the benefits of whistleblowing are very clearly known. At the same time, the incentives for whistleblowers to come forward are very, very low. I mean, it's extraordinarily difficult to blow the whistle, because the moment that you blow the whistle, you're absolutely alone. I mean, you showed the slide, when before with the gray faces and one person that sticks out. I mean, you lose all your friends, you lose all your colleagues are going to think that you're a traitor. You may lose, your money, your health. I mean, it is a very, very unfortunate situation to be in. So unless people are protected in the sense that they have enough funds to defend themselves, I totally agree with what Alicia was saying, that it's not surprising that whistleblowers that are helped by lawyers are going to have a better success than others. In addition, you also need incentives financially to expose things, because very often the person, the moment you blow the whistle, you lose your job, pretty much, right? And afterwards, people are saying, maybe you get an award at one point, and people are saying, well done, thank God that you said something. But you've lost your job, you've lost your colleagues, you've lost everything. And also, one thing that I've often seen is that, if people go back home at night and they say, oh, I exposed this, do you think that the families are going to be very happy always that, they've exposed it, they've lost their job, they lost everything? No, right? So having a financial benefit for people that expose things is important. And in that regard, I want to point out something that I've been observing in the United States, and that is the whistleblower protection fund at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so when whistleblowers expose misconduct to the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, and it's misconduct that the US government did not know about before, they actually get a percentage back of what the government got back. And so that will then enable the whistleblower to fall back on their feet and to continue a new life. So I think you need both the protection legally in terms of having enough money to be able to defend yourself, and then once you've done that, you need to go on with the rest of your life. So unless there is a financial benefit in exposing something, I think a lot of people are just going to shut up and quietly look the other way.
Alicia, please.
No, I found that interesting actually, because there is I think a different sort of view taken in the UK amongst whistleblower organizations, where I think the view is very much that whistleblowers blow the whistle because it's something that they feel deeply about, that they cannot stay silent. And if you introduce sort of an incentive, I mean, I think everyone's in favor of compensation for the damage that's done to the whistleblower. But if you have an incentive scheme, it can create amongst the public a cynicism about the whistleblower, that they're doing it for motivation, for financial reasons, and a fear that, you know, it ultimately the lawyers will probably make more money, because I think, you know, that these cases seem to drag on even longer in the US. I remember interviewing a gentleman who was involved in it was a procurement scandal. He blew the whistle on faulty body vests. It went on for 18 years. And, you know, I just cannot see how at the end of that, anything can really compensate you, because you've had 18 years of hell. And I'm very interested, Pascal, that, you know, you're not a lawyer, so you don't have a vested interest. And I've always personally thought that possibly there was that vested interest on part of the legal profession, that it is sort of good to have people bringing cases. I'm interested that there is this difference between Europe and the US, and I wonder whether you have a feeling for why it is, or maybe it's the UK and the US, but certainly it's a very strong feeling in the UK that incentives are not the way to go forward.
I'm familiar with that, and I've heard that from people in the UK. So I think there is a difference between the motivation of people to speak up, and I would totally agree that with the research of the research that was done, that you mentioned, that most whistleblowers will do it because, you know, intrinsically they feel that it's the right thing to do. I think whether or not they receive a piece of money at the end, it will still be people that do it for the right thing, because the moment that you blow the whistle, it has such a profound effect on the rest of your life, that automatically, even if you get the money, I mean, the stuff that it does to you is so profound that I think you will probably continue to see people that are doing it for the right thing, but doing things for the right thing. And then, you know, do we really want, you know, the rest of their careers and lives to be destroyed? I mean, you know, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like, you know, you're promoting a martyr. I mean, I'm doing this now also for, like, you know, the purposes of this conversation, right? You know, to push the envelope a bit. So I think if somebody blows the whistle, why not give them financial compensation at the end? I want to mention another system.
I think everyone agrees that they should have financial compensation.
Okay, so maybe it's a question of wording. Yeah. So financial compensation for you means what?
I think in the UK context, they would talk about the financial compensation for the damage that's been done to you, and that would be your loss of earnings, typically. But rather than a share of the bounty. I think that's where the UK is sort of situated. But I think there is a difference. I think certainly, you know, some lawyers, and it's not all motivated by any means, that they look at the US and they think it works well. But I know that it's not something that's supported by the whistleblower representatives in the UK. That bodies like Protect, for example, which is our main network.
I want to mention that actually, no, Peter, back to you.
No, please. Yeah.
So I want to mention another concept that I've followed, which I find very interesting, and that is Quitam. And so Quitam cases in the US system is similar to SEC whistleblowing, is that if you, and this goes back to the Civil War in the US, it's in procurement cases, if anybody can bring a case on behalf of the government, and then you get, you know, again, a cut. I think the original, I mean, the starting point is that the government or the institution realizes that unless you have somebody who talks, you're not going to know about it, and you as the institution or the organization are going to suffer. So I think that it's the starting point, the philosophical starting point, that is different. And in there, having worked, so I worked on fraud and corruption cases, unless somebody is particularly stupid, right? And some criminals are stupid, they leave traces, but most criminals are not stupid. Unfortunately, unless the criminal is stupid, or unless somebody actually talks who was observing, you're not going to find out about it. And that, I think, is a fact. Most crimes do not get found out unless somebody is kind enough to have witnessed it and then spoken up about it.
And does the government then always protect the whistleblower who brings the Quitem case? I mean, because I could have envisaged a case where you could bring in procurement a case that the government would be desperate to have, you know, quietened up, because if the corruption is within a government procurement department, how does that operate? That sounds interesting, but I would have thought that it could be quite problematic if there were political interests at the governmental level.
There again, it is difficult for whistleblowers, right? So, and at the end of then, what I explain are the systems that are in place. If you're the unlucky one that is the whistleblower, there will be consequences for that person. I mean, that person's career is finished, right? In the end, things work out, but that particular person's career will be finished. And I think it is, you know, it's the interest of society to have systems whereby whistleblowing is actually encouraged. Also, going back to the difference between what I've seen in Europe and the US, whistleblowing is still viewed around the world very much as tattletaling, as being you know, not a team player. It is not
denouncing.
Yeah, it's ratting out. You know, it's not viewed positively. So I think whistleblowing still got a bit of a public relations issue. Not everybody is it's not universally admired, even though more and more people are thinking that it's essential and good for people to do.
Well, if I may, I would just comment on one thing. I mean, Pascal, you said you described actually a very pessimistic situation of a whistleblower. Normally, in the labor laws, in at least some of the labor laws of the European Union's member states, the compensation means the re-employment of this person, full re-employment and compensation, so both. So this is just a comment, and you may want also to comment on that. On the other file, again, I would like to, both of you, and especially Alicia, I would like to ask you, how do you view the new whistleblower protection directive of the EU? And I'm sure that, Pascal, you have also seen it, you glanced at it. I mean, it's very important for us to see whether this is the right way to continue. And you know that this whistleblower protection direction was the provision of it. It has been discussed for ages in the Parliament, in the Commission, amongst the member states, and now it's a directive, and they have to the member states have to transpose it into their legal system by the end of this year. I think by December. The question is, of course, it has a lot of ramifications, because the main point is of this directive, and I let you speak afterwards, is to establish a system of a traceable system to make the work and the results of an intervention of a whistleblower known and make it positive for the organization or the institution where they are working at. So Alicia, would you like to make a comment first on the directive, please?
Sure. Well, I think in theory, it is an advance on the Public Interest Disclosure Act. It kind of picks up on a lot of the areas where PIDA has been shown to fall short in practice. I mean, I did sort of prepare some sort of thoughts on it. I could sort of go through the various areas where it builds on PIDA, if that would be helpful, and where I think it may still fall short. I think that the first thing is one of the things that sort of PIDA has revealed is that where there is a loophole, the employer or the organization that's so minded will exploit it to deprive the whistleblower of adequate remedy through the courts. So it really has to be comprehensive. I think we mentioned that there are these areas where there are disputes over who, for example, is a worker. So it has to be the broadest possible interpretation of who's covered. I would say citizens rather than workers, or you get into all these unedifying arguments over who is a worker. Is a volunteer in a charity a worker? Is a judge a worker? Is a junior doctor in training a worker? And these are sort of all areas that have spawned cases in the courts in the UK where people have blown the whistle and then they found that they aren't actually protected. So if a member state actually wants to give whistleblowing protection to its citizens, it should give it to its citizens, basically to anyone who raises one of those issues. And then there are sort of areas where, again, it goes beyond the UK in terms of requiring all organisations of a certain size, as I understand it, to set up whistleblowing channels. In the UK, I think that's only a requirement in financial services and the health service. And I think that the sad thing there is that those are the two areas that offer the most robust protections in theory, and where there are these whistleblowing channels. In the health service, they have to appoint people called freedom to speak up guardians. So if you have a problem, you can go to them and discuss your case. In financial services, they have people called whistleblower champions. And yet when I spoke to a city lawyer, his view was that whenever his clients had gone to these figures, who are typically non-directors of the company, they've been conspicuous by their absence. So the structures are in place. The practices are written down on paper, but still somehow the mechanism is, or the will isn't there to actually implement them in practice. And so I think there you have to look at, what are the sanctions that follow if you don't actually do what you purport to be doing. And I think again, there is a provision in the EU directive to set up some kind of independent body that whistleblowers can go to if they're silenced or if they're victimized. And again, in theory, that is a very good thing. But again, the test of that is going to be how well it'll work in practice, and that will depend on how well it's resourced and how wide-ranging the powers of that commission or commissioner are. And I think where we see these cases failing is through lack of resourcing in the UK, and that in a sense is in the justice system, in not giving legal support, not giving legal aid to whistleblowers who turn up at tribunals and don't actually know how to structure their case. So it's not clear what they're actually pleading. So that, that has to be that I think, financial support for people. And I think a greater sort of emphasis on investigation, because one of the things in the UK is that people go through the justice system and they come out the other end and they've maybe won their case in the sense, or very often they haven't won it, but they've been through a case which has sought to establish whether they were victimized, but the case itself still hasn't been heard, the wrong hasn't been righted. And there is a great concern that all the while that whistleblowers are being diverted down the channel of trying to salvage their career after it's been damaged. Very little is being done to actually investigate the wrong that was done. And if they lose their case, they're in a sense discredited. And I think that reduces the pressure to actually investigate the actual wrong that they were reporting in the first place. So it becomes almost a bit of a a bit of a game. So I think, yeah, it very much boils down to this question of resourcing and then implementation, and then what action you take if there hasn't been a proper implementation.
But if I may, would you see the directive as a useful instrument to make means available for an investigation, means available to set up a structure? Many of the companies and even the public services in continental Europe, in the member states, they don't even have an ombudsman, which is an institution which is in your countries, I mean in US and UK for ages. It's a normal sort of established, it's a factor of an establishment, of any establishment. And would you see this directive as something which could lead to a better protection, to better investigation, and even compensation of the victims at the end? Because at the end, you need some type of lawyer, you need some type of advice, independent advice to bring your case through. Would you see it as a positive, both of you, I'm asking you both, would you see it as a new fresh policy which will bring something for the victims, for the people who wants to do something in a proper way and to improve the situation?
I think in theory, yes. I think that it will represent an advance in countries where there is very little in place. But I think it probably will come down to the will of individual countries in how much resourcing they're prepared to put into those structures that are put in place. And I guess, the risk is that it repeats the problems that have beset the UK, where there are structures, but they're not actually offering as much protection as was hoped for, because they're inadequately resourced, and the individuals are still losing their careers at the end of the day. And they've been through a lengthy and time-consuming process. So the worst case scenario is that you actually encourage people to come forward and then you don't provide the protection that they believe they will be afforded. I do think it's a step in the right direction, but it's really down to the individual states in how much political will there is to make all those other things available, like the legal aid in the UK, that are going to increase the chances of a legitimate whistleblower actually, having their case heard and then being able to demonstrate the wrong that was done to them. So it's an advance, but all of those other things have to be in place.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for your realistic assessment. Yes, one has to be very careful with such instruments. Now I would thank you, and I would turn to Pascale, and in fact, I would ask you now to make your intervention. You will be the last one because we are heading towards the closing our session. So please take the floor.
Thank you. So I would say it's a very good first step. You have to start with a law before you can even go to implementation, right? So it is an essential first step. I would agree with Alicia very much when she mentions this false sense of protection. So there may be a lot of people who say like, oh, great, now there is a directive. But of course, the devil is in the details. And from what I've observed is that, you can kill any fantastic initiative very quietly and very effectively just by not providing enough budget. And so I think there lies a good role for civil society, for think tanks, for other people to merely inquire in the member countries, how much money have you been making available for this initiative? Who is tasked with this initiative? What is the level professionally of the people that you have tasked with this initiative? Again, the devil is in the details, and it always comes down to how much money is made available, and secondly, who are the people in charge? What is their background? How have they been appointed? Are they actually experts in this area? And have they been given the independence that they need to function? So I think we will see in the next coming years, whether this is going to work or not. Actually, it will work, but how well, it will work. I also really admire, in addition to the journalists, the organizations that are helping the whistleblowers. And without those organizations, basically nothing can happen. And so a lot of the strength of the success of the implementation of this directive, especially in the initial years, will be because these whistleblower organizations will help the individual whistleblowers. And my hat off to those people that do this very important work.
Agree.
Thank you very much. I think, Pascale, and I assume, Alicia, you would agree that this is a good ending, a positive ending about what you just said. We will need more civic societies active in this field, and we will need, of course, also the journalists. Alicia, you have doubted that if the whistleblowers would be depending upon journalists, then they would be ending very bitterly, you said somewhere. I remember the meaning of it. So I think that here the civic societies, but also the journalists, the public opinion will have to play a role. Whether this will be a priority in our future years to come, I don't know, but it is an important development, strengthening the democracy and transparency and the participation of the civil society in political decisions. So with that, if you allow me, I would cordially thank you very much for your very interesting and motivating interventions. And I hope that if ever in the future we will have an event like that, that you will not refuse to participate and support us. I'm thanking you on behalf of CEIPA, and I'm wishing you a very successful day. Pascale, your day is just beginning. And to Alicia, I wish you a nice late afternoon and evening.
Thank you.
Many thanks again. And I hope to see you soon or again in one of our events.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.